It's August 17th, 1943, and the 8th Air Force is making the deepest, bloodiest penetration into Nazi Germany yet, a daylight raid on the ball-bearing factories at Schweinfurt. Below him, 230 American bombers are flying into a meat grinder. Above him, nothing but empty blue sky and the cold realization that he's turned the wrong direction climbing out of the sun. He's 22 years old. He's logged 47 hours in a P-47 Thunderbolt, and in about 90 seconds, he's about to either die in obscurity or accidentally rewrite fighter combat doctrine for the next 3 decades. He just doesn't know it yet. The 8th Air Force doesn't trust rookies with the real work. By mid-1943, Command has seen too many fresh-faced kids arrive from flight school in Texas, full of confidence and John Wayne fantasies, only to get shredded by Messerschmitts before they've fired a single shot in anger. The average life expectancy of a new pilot in the European theater is 4 missions. 4. So the Air Force has developed a system. Pack the rookie pilots into reserve squadrons, stick them at the back of the formation, and let them learn how to not die before you give them anything important to do. Second Lieutenant Jimmy Harlow is the textbook definition of anything but important. He's tail-end Charlie in the 62nd Fighter Squadron, flying rear guard on a mission so desperate that even the veterans are writing letters home before takeoff. The target is Schweinfurt, deep in southern Germany, home to factories producing 60% of the Reich's ball bearings. Take out Schweinfurt and you cripple the Nazi war machine. But getting there means flying 600 miles into enemy territory with no fighter escort for the final 200 miles. The bombers will be naked, exposed, and the Luftwaffe knows they're coming, especially Jagdgeschwader 26. JG-26, the Abbeville boys, are the Luftwaffe's aristocrats. Based in occupied France, they've been bleeding Allied bombers since 1940. Their roster reads like a who's who of aerial murder: Joseph Priller, Wilhelm Ferdinand Galland, Johannes Seifert, men with Knight's Crosses and double-digit kill counts. Their tactic is surgical: stacked formations at altitude, slashing attacks from the sun, then a high-speed dive to safety before the escorts can respond. For 3 years, it's been devastatingly effective. The Abbeville boys have a reputation for being untouchable. Jimmy Harlow has a reputation for getting lost during training flights. He grew up on a cattle ranch outside McCook, Nebraska, where navigation meant following fence lines and the only thing above you was weather. He joined the Army Air Corps in 1942 because it beat getting drafted into the infantry, and he made it through flight school mostly by not crashing. His instructors wrote things like adequate and needs improvement in spatial orientation on his evaluations. One wrote bluntly, "Recommend assignment to transport duty." Harlow lacks the situational awareness required for combat. But it's 1943, and the Air Force is hemorrhaging pilots faster than they can train them. So Jimmy gets his wings, gets assigned to the 62nd Fighter Squadron, and gets exactly 3 weeks of unit integration before being thrown into the Schweinfurt raid. His orders are painfully simple: stay in formation, protect the bombers, don't do anything stupid. 12 minutes into the mission, Jimmy breaks all 3. The formation crosses into German airspace at 09:14 hours, 25,000 feet over Belgium. The bomber stream stretches for miles. B-17 flying fortresses, stacked in tight combat boxes, their 50 caliber guns bristling like porcupines made of aluminum and anxiety. Jimmy's P-47 is part of a 4-plane element riding high cover 2,000 feet above the bombers. His flight leader is Captain Ron Vickers, a veteran with 11 kills, and the kind of calm voice that makes you think everything's under control even when it isn't. "Bandits, 11 o'clock high," Vickers calls over the radio. JG-26. "Here we go, boys." Jimmy cranes his neck and sees them. 24 black dots above and to the left, stacked in textbook German formations. His heart starts hammering. "Stick close," Vickers says. "We turn into them together. On my mark." And that's when Jimmy's compass starts spinning. Not drifting. Spinning. The needle whirls like a roulette wheel, magnetic north, suddenly everywhere and nowhere. He taps the instrument. Nothing. He's got airspeed, altitude, engine temp. Everything works except the one instrument that tells him which direction he's pointing. The formation breaks hard left to engage the Germans. Jimmy, disoriented and fixated on his instruments, breaks right. By the time he looks up, he's alone. Panic is a cold fist around his lungs. The sky is empty. No friendlies, no bombers. Just him, 25,000 feet over Germany. With no idea which direction his squadron went. Standard procedure: climb, gain altitude, reorient, rejoin the fight. But Jimmy's compass is useless, and he's so rattled he can't remember which heading they were flying. The sun is almost directly overhead. No help. The ground below is a patchwork of fields and forests that could be anywhere in Western Europe. He's completely, utterly lost. "Think, think, think," he mutters, yanking the stick and putting the P-47 into a climbing turn, trying to gain altitude and spot the bomber stream. Then he sees the smoke. Miles ahead, black smudges against the blue, anti-aircraft flak bursting around the bombers. That's the fight. That's where he needs to be. Jimmy shoves the throttle forward and dives. The P-47 Thunderbolt is a brick with wings, but it dives like an anvil. Gravity and 2,000 horsepower send him screaming downward at 450 miles per hour, the airframe shuddering, his vision narrowing. He's diving to reorient, to find the fight, to not be the rookie who got separated and flew home in shame. He has no idea he's diving into history. At 18,000 feet, Jimmy pulls out of the dive and finally sees the battlefield clearly. The bombers are 3 miles ahead, under attack. German fighters are slashing through the formations like sharks. Parachutes blossom in the air. A B-17 corkscrews downward, trailing fire. And directly below him, perfectly framed in his gun sight, is something impossible. A dozen Messerschmitt Bf-109s in a staggered climb formation, completely unaware he's above them. It's JG-26, the Abbeville Boys, the Untouchables, and they're in a textbook offensive climb, noses up, blind to their 6 o'clock high, every single aircraft exposed. Jimmy's training is screaming. This is a trap. No one leaves themselves this open. But his instincts, the ones his instructors said he didn't have, are screaming louder. They don't know you're here. The Germans are climbing toward the bombers from the south. Jimmy's botched turn has put him north of the fight, diving into their formation from an angle they never check, because Allied fighters never come from that direction. He's in the perfect kill box, and he's got 4 seconds to decide. Jimmy doesn't think. He just acts. He rolls inverted, pulls the nose down, and dives straight into the enemy formation. The P-47's 850 caliber machine guns open up at 300 yards. The first Bf-109 disintegrates, wings folding, canopy shattering. The pilot never sees it coming. The second jerks hard left and catches a burst through the engine cowling. White smoke, then black, then a fireball. Now the Germans know he's there. The formation scatters like startled birds. But they scatter wrong, breaking in the directions their doctrine teaches. Defensive moves designed for attacks from the rear or side, not from directly above. Jimmy keeps diving, keeps firing. His adrenaline so high he doesn't feel fear. Just the tunnel vision clarity of pure reaction. A third Bf-109 tries to dive away. Jimmy follows, guns hammering. Pieces tear off the German fighter's tail. It snaps into a spin. He pulls out at 12,000 feet, breathing like he's just sprinted a mile, hands shaking on the stick. Below him, the German formation is chaos. 2 fighters are smoking toward the ground. A third is limping east. The rest have abandoned their attack run and are scattering in every direction. The Abbeville boys, untouchable for 3 years, just got shredded by a rookie who didn't know which way was north. Jimmy's radio crackles. "Who the hell was that?" someone shouts. "Unidentified jug, say your call sign." Jimmy's mouth is so dry he can barely speak. Blue 4, Harlow." Silence. Then Captain Vickers's voice, slow and disbelieving. "Harlow? The rookie?" "Yes, sir." Did you just drop an entire German squadron?" Jimmy looks at his shaking hands, at the empty sky where JG-26 used to be. I got turned around, sir. My compass." "Turned around?" Vickers laughs, sharp and almost hysterical. "Kid, you just hit them from an angle we didn't know existed." When Jimmy lands back at Bassingbourn 2 hours later, the debriefing room is packed. Intelligence officers, squadron commanders, even a colonel from 8th Air Force HQ. They make him walk through it 3 times. Every turn, every second of the dive, the exact angle of attack. "You're telling me," the colonel says slowly, "that you got separated, made a navigational error, and accidentally ended up in a high 6 position behind JG-26's offensive climb?" "Yes, sir. And they never saw you coming because no Allied fighter has ever attacked from that vector?" I guess so, sir." The room is silent. Then the intelligence officer speaks up. "Sir, if we could replicate this..." The colonel nods. "Get this to doctrine development immediately." But here's the thing about accidentally changing history. It doesn't feel like genius when you're living it. Jimmy Harlow wasn't a tactical innovator. He wasn't a prodigy. He was a scared kid with a broken compass who made a mistake and lived long enough to learn from it. To understand how one wrong turn could dismantle an elite enemy squadron and rewrite fighter tactics, you have to understand 3 things. First, the state of American fighter doctrine in 1943, aggressive, glory-hungry, and deeply flawed. Second, the Luftwaffe's tactical arrogance, 3 years of dominance that created a fatal blind spot. And third, how a farm kid from Nebraska who could barely navigate ended up in the cockpit of a P-47 Thunderbolt over Germany in the first place. Let's start at the beginning. The year is 1942, and the U.S. Army Air Force is building a fighter corps faster than it can train one. The needle wouldn't stop spinning. Second Lieutenant James Jimmy Harlow tapped the compass glass with his gloved finger, then tapped it harder. Nothing. The instrument whirled like a deranged roulette wheel. Magnetic north becoming everywhere and nowhere all at once. 25,000 feet above Belgium, 12 minutes into the deepest penetration mission the 8th Air Force had ever attempted, and Jimmy's primary navigation instrument had decided to quit. "Bandits, 11 o'clock high," Captain Vickers' voice crackled through the radio, calm despite what was coming. "JG-26. Here we go, boys. Break left on my mark." Jimmy's eyes snapped up from the spinning compass. There, black dots against the August blue, stacked high above the bomber's stream. Messerschmitts, dozens of them. "Mark!" The formation broke hard left. 4 P-47 Thunderbolts rolling in perfect synchronization to meet the German attack. Jimmy rolled with them, or thought he did, but his eyes betrayed him. Without the compass, without that familiar reference, left and right became suggestions rather than facts. He broke right. By the time his brain caught up with his hands, he was alone. The sky around him was empty. No wingmen, no bomber stream, no radio chatter. Just the howl of his Pratt & Whitney engine and the hammer of his pulse in his ears. "Blue 4 to Blue Leader," he called, hating how young his voice sounded. "I've lost sight. Compass is out. Request vector." Static. "Blue Leader, do you copy?" Nothing. Panic arrived like ice water in his veins. Standard procedures scrolled through his mind. Gain altitude, reorient using landmarks, rejoin the formation. But the ground below was a meaningless quilt of fields and forests. The sun, nearly overhead, offered no help, and somewhere in this sky, 230 American bombers were fighting for their lives while he spun in circles like a lost child. Then he saw the smoke. Miles ahead, black flowers blooming against the horizon. Anti-aircraft flak. That was the fight. That was where he needed to be. Jimmy shoved the throttle to the firewall and nosed the P-47 into a dive. The Thunderbolt didn't glide. It fell. 7 tons of aircraft and fury, dropping like a thrown anvil. The airspeed indicator climbed past 400 miles per hour. The stick went stiff in his hands. The world became a tunnel of rushing air and rattling metal. At 18,000 feet he pulled out, the force pressing him into his seat, vision graying at the edges. When his sight cleared, the battlefield spread before him in terrible clarity. The bombers were there, B-17s in their combat boxes, tiny compared to the vast sky trailing smoke and fire. German fighters slashed through the formations like knives. Parachutes dotted the air like dandelion seeds. The radio erupted with overlapping voices, warnings, curses, prayers. And directly below him, impossibly, was something that made his breath catch. A dozen Messerschmitt Bf-109s in a perfect staggered climb, their yellow noses pointed toward the bombers, completely unaware of the P-47 hanging in the sky above them. Jimmy's tactical training, all 47 hours of it, screamed warnings. This was a trap. Had to be. No combat formation left themselves exposed. The Luftwaffe didn't make mistakes like this, but his gut, the same instinct that helped him track cattle across open prairie, told him something different. They don't know you're here. He had perhaps 5 seconds before they'd spot him, before the geometry would change, before the opportunity, whatever it was, would vanish. His thumb found the gun switch on the control stick. The choice was simple: climb away to safety or dive into the most elite fighter squadron in the Luftwaffe. Jimmy Harlow, the farm kid who got lost during training flights, made his decision. He rolled inverted and pushed the stick forward. James Robert Harlow learned to fly by watching birds. Not metaphorically, literally. Growing up on a cattle ranch outside McCook, Nebraska, there wasn't much else to watch. The land was flat enough that you could see weather coming from 3 counties away, and the sky was so big it made you feel small even when you were the only person for miles. His father, Robert Harlow, ran 2,000 head of cattle across 12 sections of prairie grass and stubborn optimism. The work was hard, the money was inconsistent, and the future was predetermined. Jimmy would inherit the ranch, marry a local girl, and spend his life doing exactly what his father did. It wasn't a bad life. It just wasn't the only life. Jimmy was 17 when he saw his first airplane up close. A barnstormer landed in a pasture outside town, offering rides for $2. The aircraft was a battered Curtiss Jenny held together with baling wire and prayer, and the pilot was a weathered man who smelled like whiskey and engine oil. "You ever been up?" the pilot asked. Jimmy shook his head. $2, 10 minutes. You'll see your whole world from a different angle. He paid with money he'd saved from selling a calf. The flight lasted exactly 10 minutes, and when he climbed out of the cockpit, his hands were shaking and his heart was hammering, and he knew with absolute certainty that nothing would ever be the same. His father noticed immediately. "Don't get ideas, boy. Flying's for rich men and fools." Yes, sir, but the idea had already taken root. When the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor in December 1941, Jimmy was 19 years old and still working the ranch. The radio brought news of carriers burning and battleships sinking and a nation lurching toward war. Within weeks, the recruitment posters appeared in McCook's post office. "Join the Army Air Corps, see the world." His father didn't speak to him for 3 days after he enlisted. His mother packed his bag and kissed his forehead. "Come home," she whispered. "I will," he promised, not knowing if it was true. Basic training at Shepherd Field, Texas, was a blur of marching, rifle drills, and physical conditioning. Then came the aptitude tests, mechanical reasoning, spatial orientation, reflexes. Jimmy passed everything except navigation, where his scores were aggressively average. "You got good hands," the flight instructor told him during primary training at Coleman, Texas. "Natural feel for the stick. But son, you get lost more than anyone I've ever seen." It was true. Put Jimmy in a cockpit, and he could feel what the airplane wanted to do, could sense lift and drag and the edge of a stall. But ask him to navigate by compass and map, and he'd end up 10 miles off course every time. "How'd you find your way around on that ranch of yours?" the instructor asked. "Landmarks," Jimmy admitted. "Fence lines, creek beds. I just looked at things." Well, in combat, you can't just look at things. You need instruments, discipline, precision. He almost washed out twice. Once for landing at the wrong airfield. Once for losing his entire formation during a cross-country exercise and showing up 30 minutes late covered in excuses. But it was 1943, and the Army Air Corps was bleeding pilots faster than they could train replacements. The standards, while still high, had become negotiable. If you could take off, fly straight, and land without killing yourself, you'd probably get your wings. Jimmy graduated flight school in July 1943 with marks that read like a report card for mediocrity. Adequate. Satisfactory. Needs improvement in navigation and formation discipline. One instructor wrote a single sentence that would haunt Jimmy's file. Recommend transport or observation duty. Lacks situational awareness for fighter combat. 3 weeks later, he was assigned to the 62nd Fighter Squadron, 56th Fighter Group, 8th Air Force. 2 weeks after that, he was sitting in a briefing room at Bassingbourn, England, learning about a place called Schweinfurt. And 1 week after that, his compass would stop working at exactly the wrong moment. Or exactly the right one. The briefing room at Bassingbourn smelled like coffee, cigarette smoke, and fear. August 16, 1943, 1900 hours. Every pilot in the 62nd Fighter Squadron sat in rows of folding chairs, their eyes fixed on the map at the front of the room. A red line stretched from England across the Channel, over Belgium, and into the heart of Germany, terminating at a small city in Bavaria. Schweinfurt. Colonel Hubert Zemke, commander of the 56th Fighter Group, stood beside the map with the expression of a man who'd been ordered to do something impossible and given inadequate tools to accomplish it. "Gentlemen," he began, "tomorrow we're going after the ball-bearing factories at Schweinfurt and Regensburg. These facilities produce 60% of Germany's precision bearings. Take them out, and we cripple tank production, aircraft manufacturing, everything that rolls or flies." He paused, letting that sink in. "It's also the deepest penetration mission we've ever attempted, 600 miles into enemy territory. The bombers will be exposed for over 2 hours with limited fighter cover." Someone in the back muttered, "Limited? We can escort them to the German border," Zemke continued. "Then our range runs out. They go in alone. They'll have P-47s on the way back, but for 2 hours over the target, they're naked." The room went quiet. Everyone understood what that meant. The Luftwaffe would be waiting. And they'd come in force. Captain Ron Vickers, Jimmy's flight leader, raised his hand. "What about enemy fighters, sir? What are we expecting?" Zemke nodded to the intelligence officer, a thin lieutenant with glasses who looked like he'd never left a library. "Significant resistance," the lieutenant said, pulling down a second map showing German airfields. "We're anticipating coordinated attacks from multiple Jagdgeschwaders, specifically JG-26 out of Abbeville." A ripple of recognition went through the room. Everyone knew JG-26, as well as JG-2, JG-11, and elements of JG-1. Conservative estimates put enemy fighters at over 300 aircraft. Someone whistled low. "Our job," Zemke cut in, "is to get the bombers to the border and make sure the Luftwaffe pays a price for every inch after that. We'll fly close escort up to the limit of our range, engage any fighters that approach the bomber stream, then hand off to the next relay group. He looked across the room, his gaze steady. I won't lie to you. This is going to be bad. We're going to lose bombers. We're going to lose fighters. But if we succeed, we will take a year off from this war. Maybe more. The briefing continued. Altitudes, radio frequencies, rendezvous points, emergency procedures. Jimmy copied everything into his kneeboard notepad, his handwriting getting sloppier as the details piled up. Takeoff, row 7:30 hours. Climb to 25,000 feet. Rendezvous with the bomber stream over Ipswich. Escort depth. German border, approximately 200 miles inland. Expected combat, extreme. After the briefing, pilots filed out in silence. Some went to write letters. Others headed to the chapel. A few went straight to the bar. Jimmy walked to the flight line and stood beside his P-47, tail number 2Z, staring at the massive radial engine and the .850 caliber machine guns bristling from the wings. First big show, huh? He turned. Captain Vickers stood behind him, smoking a cigarette. Yes, sir. Nervous? Terrified, sir. Vickers smiled. Good. That means you're paying attention. He took a long drag. Stick close tomorrow. Don't try to be a hero. You do your job, stay in formation, and we all come home. Understood? Yes, sir. And Harlow? Check your compass before we take off. Last thing I need is you getting lost over Germany. Jimmy forced a laugh. Yes, sir. Vickers walked away, and Jimmy stayed there in the gathering dark, watching the mechanics prep the aircraft for tomorrow's mission. Somewhere over Germany, the Luftwaffe was preparing too, fueling aircraft, loading ammunition, briefing their own pilots on how to kill as many Americans as possible. In 16 hours, the sky over Schweinfurt would become a slaughterhouse. And Jimmy Harlow, the farm kid who couldn't navigate, would be right in the middle of it. Jagdgeschwader 26 didn't just shoot down Allied aircraft, they humiliated them. Based at Abbeville in occupied France, JG-26 had been the Luftwaffe's elite since the Battle of Britain. Their roster read like the greatest hits of aerial murder: Joseph Pips Priller, Wilhelm Ferdinand Galland, Johannes Seifert, Klaus Mitusch, men with Knight's crosses around their necks and kill counts that made Allied intelligence officers sick. By August 1943, JG-26 had perfected the art of bomber interception to a science. Their doctrine was simple and devastatingly effective. Stacked formations at high altitude, positioned between the bombers and the sun. They'd wait until the American formations were deep into German territory, far from fighter escort, then strike in coordinated waves. The first wave hit head-on, Bf-109s diving straight through the bomber boxes at closing speeds over 600 miles per hour, cannon fire ripping through cockpits and engines. The goal wasn't precision, it was chaos. Break up the formations, kill the lead aircraft, create confusion. The second wave exploited that chaos, attacking from the sides and below, targeting stragglers and damaged bombers already falling out of formation. These were the kill shots, the methodical executions. Then came the final indignity, a high-speed dive to safety, usually eastward, too fast for Allied escorts to follow even if any were still around. For 3 years, this tactic had been nearly unstoppable. JG-26 had learned to read American bomber formations like a book. They knew the B-17s flew in staggered combat boxes for mutual fire support, so they attacked from angles that minimized exposure to defensive guns. They knew American fighters prioritized protecting the lead bombers, so they targeted the rear elements. They knew the P-47s had limited range, so they simply waited until the escorts had to turn back. The Abbeville boys fought with Prussian discipline and aristocratic contempt. They viewed the Americans as brave but predictable, good aircraft, poor tactics, and a depressing willingness to die in straight lines. They fly like they're on parade. Oberleutnant Klaus Mitusch once remarked, after a mission where his squadron had downed 12 B-17s without a single loss. All that firepower, all that armor, and they refused to maneuver. He wasn't entirely wrong. American bomber doctrine in 1943 emphasized tight formations and mutual fire support over evasive action. The theory was sound. Stay together, concentrate your defensive fire, and the enemy will pay too high a price to press the attack. The reality was different. The Luftwaffe was willing to pay that price. JG-26's tactics had one critical assumption. They owned the altitude advantage. By positioning themselves above and between the bombers and the sun, they controlled when and how the engagement began. Allied fighters approaching from below or behind had to climb into the attack, burning energy and speed, arriving vulnerable and predictable. No Allied fighter group had ever successfully attacked JG-26 from above their formation during an intercept climb. Not because it was impossible, but because the geometry never aligned that way. American escorts stayed with the bombers. German fighters stayed above the escorts. The vertical hierarchy was gospel. JG-26's blind spot wasn't tactical. It was psychological. 3 years of dominance had created institutional arrogance. They'd stopped checking their 6 o'clock high during offensive climbs because nothing had ever come from that direction. Why would it? Allied fighters were tied to the bombers like dogs on leashes. They didn't roam. They didn't improvise. They flew the mission as briefed, predictable, and mortal. On the morning of August 17, 1943, JG-26 launched from Abbeville with full confidence. The Americans were coming to Schweinfurt. The route was known. The bomber stream would pass through their sector around 09:30 hours. Priller briefed his pilots with his usual economy. Standard intercept, head on attack, then pick off the stragglers. Watch for escorts at the border. But they won't follow us deep. Everything was routine. Everything was going exactly according to plan. Until a rookie with a broken compass fell out of the sky in the one place they never thought to look. The moment Jimmy realized he was alone, his mouth went dry. 1 second, he was part of a 4-ship formation, breaking left to engage the German fighters climbing toward the bomber's stream. The next, he was staring at empty sky, the radio silent except for bursts of static that might have been voices or might have been his imagination. "Blue leader, this is Blue 4. His voice cracked. He cleared his throat, tried again. "Blue 4 to Blue leader, I've lost visual." Nothing. He craned his neck left, then right, searching for the distinctive silhouette of a P-47. The sky was crystalline blue, visibility unlimited, and completely empty. How do you lose 3 other aircraft in unlimited visibility? His eyes dropped to the compass. The needle was still spinning uselessly, offering no reference, no truth. The altimeter read 24,500 feet. Airspeed 280. Engine temp normal. Everything worked except his ability to know which direction he was pointing. Training took over. Standard lost wingman procedure. Climb to gain altitude and visibility. Look for the bomber stream. Rejoin the formation. Jimmy pulled back on the stick and added power, the P-47 climbing in a lazy circle while he scanned the horizon. His breathing was too fast, shallow. The oxygen mask felt like it was suffocating him. He forced himself to slow down, to think. The bombers were heading southeast. The sun is almost overhead, maybe slightly south. So east should be. He looked at the spinning compass and gave up. Then he saw it. Smoke on the horizon. Black puffs of anti-aircraft fire. Miles away but unmistakable. That was the fight. That was where the bombers were dying. Relief flooded through him. Get to the smoke. Find the formation. Simple. He nosed the P-47 over and pushed the throttle forward. The big fighter accelerated eagerly, happy to trade altitude for speed. The distance closed quickly. 2 miles, then 1, the smoke resolving into individual flak bursts flowering around a stream of bombers stretched across the sky like a silver river. At 18,000 feet, Jimmy pulled out of his dive and finally saw the full scope of the battle. It was chaos. B-17s in tight formations, their contrails weaving patterns against the blue. German fighters slashing through the bomber stream, leaving smoke trails and falling aircraft in their wake. Parachutes everywhere, white blossoms drifting down toward occupied Europe and prison camps, or worse. The radio came alive as he got closer. Overlapping transmissions, painting an audio picture of desperation. Got 2 on my tail. Leaders hit. Leaders hit. Need help. Anyone? Bailing out. Jimmy's heart hammered. This wasn't like training. This was industrial-scale killing, methodical and efficient, and he'd just flown into the middle of it. Then his tactical brain, the part his instructors said didn't exist, registered something strange. Below him, maybe 2,000 feet down, a formation of German fighters was climbing toward the bombers in a staggered line. 12 aircraft, maybe more, their yellow-painted noses clearly visible. They were positioned perfectly for a head-on attack into the bomber stream. And they hadn't seen him. Jimmy blinked, certain he was missing something. German fighters didn't leave themselves exposed like this. There had to be top cover, other aircraft high above watching for threats. He looked up. Empty sky. He looked behind. Nothing. The Germans below were completely focused on the bombers ahead, climbing steadily, confidently, their formation tight and professional. They don't know I'm here. The thought arrived with crystalline clarity. His botched turn, his navigational error, his panicked dive to reorient, all of it had placed him in a position that shouldn't exist. He was high and behind an enemy formation that had no reason to check their six because Allied fighters never came from this direction. The geometry was perfect. Textbook. Impossible. His thumb moved to the gun switch on top of the control stick. Training said, rejoin your formation. Don't engage alone. Survival is the mission. Instinct said something different. Instinct said, you'll never get this chance again. Jimmy Harlow, the farm kid who got lost during training flights, rolled his P-47 inverted and pushed the stick forward into a near-vertical dive. What Jimmy had stumbled into had a name in aerial combat theory, the high-6 offensive position. It was the ideal attack geometry, high altitude, directly behind the enemy, diving with speed and gravity on your side. Luftwaffe aces dreamed about this position. Allied tacticians taught it as gospel. Everyone wanted it. Almost nobody got it. The problem was energy management. In a dogfight, altitude equals potential energy. Speed equals kinetic energy. You trade one for the other constantly. Climb to gain altitude. Dive to gain speed. The fighter with more energy controls the engagement. The fighter with less energy dies. German doctrine in 1943 emphasized maintaining energy advantage through superior positioning. Their fighters started high, attacked from above, and dove away before Allied escorts could climb to engage. It worked because physics was on their side. American escort fighters couldn't climb above the German formations because they were tied to the bombers. If a P-47 climbed to 30,000 feet to challenge a German formation at altitude, he'd leave the bombers exposed below. So American fighters stayed lower, accepting the energy disadvantage because the mission required it. This created a predictable vertical hierarchy. Germans high, bombers middle, American escorts low. JG-26 had built their entire intercept doctrine around this hierarchy. During an offensive climb toward the bombers, they checked 3 directions obsessively, below and behind, where American escorts would come from if they broke formation to engage. Level and ahead, where other German fighters might create collision hazards. High and ahead, where the bombers' defensive guns would start firing. They didn't check high and behind because the geometry made it impossible. American fighters couldn't get there. They were below, tied to the bombers, climbing through thinner air at a disadvantage. Except Jimmy wasn't below. His navigational error had separated him from the formation during the initial break. His panicked dive to reorient had carried him north of the bomber stream. And when he climbed back up looking for the fight, he'd climbed into airspace the Germans had already passed through, behind their advance, above their formation. The result was a position that violated every assumption JG-26's doctrine was built on. Jimmy was high, 18,000 feet versus their 16,000. He was behind. They were climbing away from him. Blind spots oriented toward the threat they expected. He was diving, trading his altitude for devastating speed, already passing 400 miles per hour and accelerating. And he had a surprise. The one advantage worth more than altitude, speed, or firepower combined. In aerial combat, surprise collapses decision-making time to zero. A pilot who sees the attack coming can maneuver, can fight back, can at least try to survive. A pilot who doesn't see it never gets the chance. JG-26's formation was perfect for what they intended to do: attack bombers. Staggered line abreast, each aircraft offset slightly from the next, creating overlapping fields of fire for a head-on pass. But for defending against an attack from above and behind, the formation was a liability. The stagger meant they blocked each other's 6 o'clock view. The climb attitude meant their noses were high, cockpit visibility oriented forward and up, and their focus, entirely on the bombers ahead, created tunnel vision. Jimmy's P-47 Thunderbolt carried 8 50-caliber M2 Browning machine guns, 4 in each wing. Combined rate of fire, over 800 rounds per minute. At convergence range, the distance where all 8 gun lines intersected, those 50 rounds per second created a cone of destruction 6 feet wide. A Messerschmitt Bf-109G was 9 feet tall and 29 feet long. Do the math. Jimmy had altitude, speed, surprise, and 8 machine guns pointed at targets that didn't know he existed. What he was about to do wasn't bravery. It wasn't genius. It was physics. And JG-26, for the first time in 3 years, was on the wrong side of the equation. The dive took 4 seconds. In those 4 seconds, Jimmy Harlow rewrote the book on fighter escort tactics. He just didn't know it yet. The first Messerschmitt never knew what hit it. Jimmy's gun sight piper settled on the rearmost Bf-109 at 300 yards. His thumb pressed the gun trigger. 8 50-caliber machine guns erupted with a sound like ripping canvas, and the P-47 shuddered from the recoil. The convergence was perfect. 50 rounds per second hammered into the German fighter's fuselage just behind the cockpit. Metal peeled away in bright flashes. The canopy disintegrated. The left wing folded upward at an impossible angle, then separated completely. The 109 tumbled out of formation, already burning, already dead. Jimmy didn't watch it fall. He was already tracking the next target. 2 seconds elapsed. The second Messerschmitt pilot must have seen something. A reflection, a shadow, his wingman disintegrating in his peripheral vision, because he broke hard left. It was a good instinct, perfectly executed, and completely inadequate. Jimmy's dive speed was north of 450 miles per hour. He pulled lead, fired, and the stream of tracers walked across the sky into the turning fighter. The engine cowling erupted in white smoke, then black. Coolant and oil sprayed across the windscreen. The 109's nose dropped, and it fell away, trailing fire. Now the formation knew. 5 seconds elapsed. The Germans scattered, not in panic, but in trained defensive breaks. Hard turns, split-S maneuvers, each pilot reverting to individual survival instincts. It was exactly what their doctrine taught. When ambushed from high, Dive away, use speed to escape. Regroup lower. But diving away from a P-47 that already had a speed advantage was like running from a bullet. Jimmy followed the nearest 109 into a near-vertical dive. The stick went rigid from air pressure. His vision tunneled. The altimeter unwound like a broken watch. 16,000 feet, 15,000, 14,000. He fired in short bursts. Tracers converged on the fleeing Messerschmitt. Pieces tore off the tail, rudder, elevator, bits of fuselage. The German fighter snapped into an inverted spin. 12 seconds elapsed. Jimmy pulled out of the dive at 12,000 feet, the G-force crushing him into his seat, gray curtains closing over his vision. When his sight cleared, he was gasping for breath and completely disoriented. The sky around him was empty except for smoke trails and falling debris. He craned his neck, searching for threats. Above, empty. Behind, empty. Left, right, nothing but there. 2 Messerschmitts, 3,000 feet below, heading east at full throttle. Running. The radio exploded with voices. Who the hell? From above, they came from above. Blue 4, say your position. Jimmy ignored the radio. His hands were shaking. His breathing was ragged. He felt like he'd just sprinted a mile carrying a piano. What just happened? He looked down at his fuel gauge. He'd burned through a quarter tank in the dive. Ammunition counters showed 400 rounds expended. His aircraft was intact. No holes, no damage. Controls responding normally. Below, the bomber stream continued east, the B-17s plowing through flak and smoke like ships in a storm. But the immediate threat, the German formation climbing for a head-on attack, was gone. Scattered, broken. 30 seconds elapsed from first trigger pull to last. In that half-minute, Jimmy Harlow had destroyed or damaged at least 3 Messerschmitts, shattered a coordinated attack before it reached the bombers, survived his first combat engagement, and done it all from a position that shouldn't have existed, using tactics that weren't in any manual against an enemy that never saw him coming. His radio crackled. Unidentified Jug, say your call sign. Now. Jimmy's mouth was so dry he could barely speak. Blue 4, Harlow. Silence. Then Captain Vickers' voice, slow and absolutely incredulous. Harlow? The rookie? Yes, sir. Did you just… Vickers stopped, started again. Did you just drop an entire German squadron? Jimmy looked at the empty sky where JG-26 had been, at the smoke trails, at the scattered parachutes drifting toward the ground. I think so, sir. From where? I got turned around, lost the formation, came in high. Another pause. Then Vickers laughed, a sharp, almost hysterical sound. Hi! Jesus Christ, kid! Do you have any idea what you just did? Jimmy didn't. Not yet. But 8,000 miles away, in a briefing room at 8th Air Force Headquarters, someone would. The intelligence officers didn't believe him at first. Jimmy sat in the debriefing room at Bassingbourn, still wearing his sweat-soaked flight suit, trying to explain for the third time how he'd ended up in a high 6 position behind JG-26. Let me make sure I understand, Captain Morris from Intelligence said, his pencil hovering over a notepad. Your compass malfunctioned. You broke the wrong direction during the initial engagement. You got separated from your flight. And while trying to reorient, you accidentally climbed into an attack position behind a German fighter formation. Yes, sir. And they never saw you coming. No, sir, I don't think so. Morris exchanged a glance with Colonel Zemke, who stood against the wall with his arms crossed, expression unreadable. How many did you shoot down? Morris asked. I'm not sure. Sir, 3 confirmed, maybe. 2 were definitely burning. The 3rd was hit, but I lost sight of it. Gun camera footage? I don't know if it was working, sir. Morris made a note. We'll check. Now, describe the attack geometry again. Exact altitude, angle of dive, Your speed and theirs. Jimmy walked through it again, the memory already starting to feel unreal. The spinning compass, the wrong turn, the climb, the dive. 30 seconds that felt like 3 hours. When he finished, the room was quiet. Then a new voice spoke from the doorway. What was their formation? Jimmy turned. A major he didn't recognize stood there holding a thick folder. Staggered line abreast, sir, Jimmy said, climbing toward the bombers. And they were checking? Forward and down, I think. Maybe their flanks. But not behind. The major nodded slowly, then looked at Zemke. Permission to speak with the lieutenant, sir. Granted. The major pulled up a chair and sat across from Jimmy. His name tag read Walsh, and his uniform showed ribbons from North Africa and Sicily. Lieutenant, I'm with Tactical Doctrine Development. Do you understand what you did today? I shot down some Germans, sir. You did more than that. Walsh opened his folder and pulled out a diagram, a tactical chart showing fighter formations and attack vectors. For 3 years, Luftwaffe intercept doctrine has relied on altitude advantage. They position high, attack from above, and dive away before we can respond. It works because our fighters are tied to the bombers. We can't climb above the Germans without leaving the bombers exposed. He traced a line on the diagram. But you weren't tied to the bombers. You were separated, lost. And when you tried to rejoin, you climbed through airspace the Germans had already passed through. That put you... He tapped the diagram. Here. High 6 offensive. The one position we've never been able to achieve during a bomber escort mission. Jimmy stared at the diagram. I didn't mean to... I know, but here's what matters. It worked. You hit them from an angle they don't defend against because we've never attacked from that angle before. Their doctrine has a blind spot, and you found it. Walsh pulled out another sheet, a typed mission report with sections highlighted in yellow. 3 Bf-109s destroyed or damaged. 1 coordinated attack completely disrupted before it reached the bomber stream. 0 American bombers lost in your sector during that engagement window. He looked up at Jimmy. Do you know what the average loss rate was in other sectors during today's mission? Jimmy shook his head. 12%. We lost 28 bombers today, Lieutenant. In your sector, during the time you were engaging JGE-26, we lost 0. The weight of that settled over the room. Zemke spoke from the wall. Major Walsh wants to know if your attack can be replicated. Intentionally. I don't know, sir, Jimmy said. My compass was broken. I was lost. It was just... Luck? Walsh finished. Maybe, but even luck can be studied, analyzed, turned into doctrine. He closed his folder. Lieutenant Harlow, I'm going to need you to tell me everything you remember about those 30 seconds, every detail, because if we can teach this, if we can put fighters in that position deliberately, he smiled, we might just win this war. Jimmy Harlow never became an ace. After Schweinfurt, he flew 43 more missions over Europe. He scored 2 more confirmed kills, both in conventional engagements, both unremarkable except for the fact that he survived them. His final tally, 5 aerial victories, earned him ace status technically, but barely. Nobody remembers those other kills. They remember the dive. By September 1943, the Harlow maneuver had entered official 8th Air Force tactical vocabulary. Fighter groups started practicing high-altitude separation tactics, deliberately positioning elements above and behind the main escort formation to exploit the same blind spot Jimmy had found by accident. The results were immediate and dramatic. German intercept formations that had operated with impunity for 3 years suddenly found themselves under attack from angles they'd never defended against. Loss rates among Luftwaffe fighters climbed. Bomber losses decreased. JG-26 adapted, of course. By late 1943, they'd revised their doctrine to include top-cover elements watching the high 6 position. But the adaptation cost them energy and flexibility. The invisible shield of altitude advantage had been cracked. Jimmy was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross. The citation read, "For extraordinary achievement during aerial combat, demonstrating initiative and tactical innovation under fire." He kept the medal in a drawer and rarely talked about it. After the war, he returned to Nebraska, married his high school sweetheart, and took over his father's ranch. He spent 40 years raising cattle, mending fences, and watching the sky, the same sky that had made him briefly famous. Reporters would find him occasionally, especially around anniversaries. They'd ask him to describe the dive, to explain his thinking, to reveal the moment of tactical genius that had changed aerial combat doctrine. "There wasn't any genius," he'd tell them. "My compass broke. I got lost. I dove to find the bombers, and there were Germans in the way. So I shot them. But the angle of attack was an accident. The Air Force teaches it now as, 'I know what they teach.' Doesn't change what happened." The reporters never seemed satisfied with that answer. They wanted a hero's story, a moment of clarity and courage. Jimmy gave them the truth. He'd been a scared kid who made a mistake and got lucky. In 1983, the Air Force invited him to speak at the Air Command and Staff College. He was 63 years old, retired, uncomfortable, in the suit his wife made him wear. The auditorium was full of fighter pilots, young men and women learning tactics that traced their lineage back to a 30-second dive over Germany 40 years earlier. After his talk, a captain approached him. "Sir, I have to ask, when you rolled inverted and committed to the dive, what were you thinking?" Jimmy considered the question. Considered lying, giving this young pilot the answer he wanted. Instead, he told the truth. "I was thinking that I'd screwed up everything they taught me, that I was lost, alone, and probably going to die, and that if I was going to die anyway, I might as well take some of them with me." The captain blinked. "That's not what the manual says, sir." Jimmy smiled. "The manual came later. At the moment, it's just you and physics and fear. The trick is doing something useful with fear." He died in 1998, 2 weeks after his 78th birthday. The funeral was small. Family, neighbors, a few veterans from the 62nd Fighter Squadron who were still alive to remember. The Air Force sent a delegation. They presented his widow with a flag and a letter from the Chief of Staff thanking Jimmy for his service and his invaluable contribution to air combat doctrine. His son, reading the eulogy, said, "Dad never thought he was special. He thought he got lost and got lucky." Maybe he was right. But lucky or not, he showed a lot of people that sometimes the best tactics come from being brave enough to be lost. They buried him in McCook, Nebraska, under a sky so big you could see for 3 counties. And somewhere above, where the air is thin and the contrails fade to nothing, the legend flies on. Closer than regulations, higher than doctrine, born from a wrong turn and 30 seconds of accidental perfection.